All right, so Spinoza, huh? You really want to dive into this guy. Buckle up, because he's a fascinating one. We've been going through all those articles and notes you sent, and let me tell you, this guy was thinking way outside the
Oh,
box.
absolutely. Even centuries later, he's still making people rethink some pretty fundamental stuff about like reality and what it means to be human.
Yeah, he didn't shy away from the big questions, that's for sure. And one of the areas where it's most evident is in his concept of God. We've got these excerpts here from Who is Spinoza's God, and it really gets into how radical his view
You
was.
see, for Spinoza, God wasn't this like separate being up in the heavens.
Yeah.
He saw God as the very fabric of the universe.
So instead of God being out there somewhere, he's saying we're already in God, like we're part of it all.
Exactly. He believed that God is the substance of everything that exists. He's both immanent, meaning he's within everything, and transcendent, meaning he's also beyond our full comprehension.
Whoa, okay, I'm already feeling my brain stretching. So what does that mean for like traditional religious ideas, prayer, for example?
Well, think about it. In many religions, you pray to a God who's separate from you. But for Spinoza, prayer would be more about connecting with that divine essence that's within yourself and within all things.
That's a pretty different way of looking at it. It kind of challenges the whole idea that humans are like the center of everything, right?
Right. In Spinoza's view, humanity isn't the sole focus of creation. We're just one part of this incredible universe that is God.
And that has some pretty big implications for how we see our place in the world, doesn't it? Like our responsibility to each other and the planet.
Absolutely. But, this idea of God being everything also really impacts how Spinoza viewed ourselves, especially the relationship between our minds and bodies. He didn't see them as separate at all.
I came across this line in the text that really tripped me up. The object of the idea which constitutes the human mind is a body. Help me out here.
It's definitely a dense one. But what Spinoza's getting at is that our minds are fundamentally grounded in our physical selves. They're two sides of the same coin. Just like for him, thought and extension are two attributes of God.
Okay, so our minds and bodies are connected, but doesn't that contradict the idea of free will? If our minds are tied to our physical bodies, how can we be truly free?
That's a question philosophers have debated forever. But Spinoza believed that while our experiences shape our minds, we still have the capacity for reason. And that's what allows us to understand our emotions and make choices that align with our true nature.
So it's not about denying free will. It's more like recognizing that it's intertwined with, well, everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's all connected. To illustrate this idea, think about how much our physical state affects our mental state. When you're sick or super tired, it's harder to think straight, right?
Yeah. Oh, tell me about it. I've definitely had those days where my brain is just foggy. Okay, so we've been talking about these really radical ideas, but there's another side to Spinoza that I found so interesting. He wasn't just a philosopher, he was like a skilled craftsman too.
Yeah, he was a lens grinder, and a really good one, apparently. He used that to support himself while he was doing all his philosophical work.
And not just any lens grinding, right? He worked with Christian Huygens, this big-time scientist, on microscope designs. I mean, it makes you wonder if, working with lenses, literally seeing the world through them, influenced his philosophical views.
It's a really cool connection, isn't it? Maybe all that grinding and shaping to achieve clarity with the lenses kind of reflects how he approached his philosophy, too. He built his arguments carefully, looking at things from all sides to try and get to the truth.
I love that. And speaking of seeking clarity, the text also talks about Spinoza's ethics. They seem really rooted in reason. He believed true happiness comes from understanding God, in that unique way he defined it, and acting in accordance with reason.
Right, and for Spinoza, reason wasn't about just cold, hard logic. It was a pathway to freedom and living a fulfilling life. To him, understanding God was about understanding the laws of nature, how things are, and then aligning ourselves with that.
But wouldn't that be kind of, I don't know, impersonal? Where's the comfort people find in traditional religion, that personal connection?
That's a really common question. He wouldn't deny the comfort others find in traditional faiths, but he'd say that true fulfillment doesn't come from relying on external forces or longing for some otherworldly God. It comes from understanding reality for what it is and accepting our place within it.
So it's about finding happiness within what is, rather than wishing things were different.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean we deny our emotions. It's about understanding and controlling them, not letting them rule us.
And he saw reason as the key to doing that.
Absolutely. Reason helps us step back from those strong emotions, understand where they're coming from, and then choose how we respond. It's all about balance.
It's interesting how that connects back to his ideas about politics, too. The text mentions he was all for democracy, which seems to fit with this emphasis on reason and individual freedom.
Yeah, he saw democracy as the most natural form of government because it allows for the most individual autonomy while also striving for a harmonious society.
Because ideally, the laws in a democracy reflect the collective reasoning of the people, not just the whims of one ruler.
Exactly. For Spinoza, it's all connected. It goes back to that idea of living a life guided by reason, understanding, and respect for ourselves and others.
But things get a little trickier when we consider Spinoza's view of human nature. The text says he had a somewhat, well, less optimistic take on it.
Yeah, he didn't sugarcoat it. He believed that we're not inherently free in every moment. Instead, we're often driven by desires and emotions that are influenced by things outside of ourselves.
He even talked about slavery to the passions. What did he mean by that?
Think about a time you were so overcome with anger, fear, or desire that you couldn't think clearly. Those emotions take over.
Oh, I've been there for sure. I remember this one time when I...
We all have those moments. That's exactly what Spinoza was talking about. He called it slavery because it's like we become a slave to those strong emotions. They can really lead us down the wrong path.
So it's not that we lack reason, it's that we sometimes let our passions overpower it.
You got it. And for Spinoza, that's where the danger lies. We become reactive, controlled by external forces or our own unchecked feelings, instead of making choices based on understanding and reason.
It makes you think about how easily we can get caught up in things today, like social media drama or political arguments. Spinoza's reminding us to hit pause, reflect, and use that power of reason so we don't get swept away by all that.
He's surprisingly relevant, isn't he? Spinoza encourages us to question, to understand why we react the way we do, and to try for a more balanced approach to life.
And on that note, he had this quote that really stuck with me. The human mind cannot be totally destroyed along with the body, but something remains that is eternal. What's your take on that one?
Oh yeah, that's a fascinating one. It gets at Spinoza's concept of eternity. He didn't believe in an afterlife in the traditional sense, but he did believe that something of the human mind persists beyond our physical existence.
So even though our individual consciousness might fade, there's still a connection to that larger, timeless reality that he identified with God.
Exactly. It goes back to the idea that we're all part of this one substance, this reality that's both the universe and God. Even though individual waves come and go, we're all still part of that vast ocean of being.
Okay, wow, that is a lot to process. We've only just scratched the surface of Spinoza's ethics and what he thought a good life really means.
So we're back. Last time we were getting into Spinoza's view of human nature and how we're all kind of pulled between reason and emotions.
Yeah, and it seems like understanding that tension is key to his whole idea of how to actually live a good life, what he called the ethics.
You got it. And it's not about like a set of rules. You know, Spinoza's ethics are more about cultivating a way of being, one that's guided by reason and this deep understanding of ourselves and the world.
Because, like we were talking about before, he believed that using reason is what leads us to true freedom and happiness. But man, it's not always easy to access that reason, is it?
Not at all. Remember that slavery to the passions thing?
Yeah.
He knew we can get so caught up in our emotions that we lose sight of what's truly good for us.
Right. So living ethically, according to Spinoza, is about learning to identify those adequate ideas, basically, those clear, true understandings about ourselves and the world that can help us really thrive.
Exactly. It's using reason to see past all the illusions and understand what's driving our emotions. Then we can make choices that lead to well-being, both for ourselves and the people around us.
What I find so fascinating is how Spinoza connects all this back to his idea of God. He argued that understanding the true nature of God is essential for living ethically, but his God is so different from the traditional view.
That's one of the most radical things about Spinoza, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't talking about a personal God who's judging us or answering prayers. For him, understanding God meant grasping the essence of the universe itself. That underlying substance is expressed in everything.
So more about understanding the laws of nature, how everything's interconnected, and where we fit into all of that.
Exactly. He saw this substance as both immanent, meaning it's within the universe, and transcendent, meaning it's also beyond our full understanding. It's like, imagine trying to grasp the entire ocean. You could experience the waves, the currents, but the true depths are still a mystery.
That's a great analogy. So for Spinoza, it wasn't about religious dogma or blind faith. It was about a deep, reasoned understanding of reality.
Absolutely. And that kind of understanding can be incredibly transformative. It leads to a sense of awe and humility, recognizing we're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
I can see how that would shift your perspective. If everything comes from this divine substance, from this underlying unity, then it's pointless to fight against how things are or try to force our will on the world.
You're getting it. Spinoza's ethics aren't about imposing our desires on reality. It's about understanding and accepting the natural order, the flow of cause and effect.
So it's about finding freedom within the constraints of what is. That almost seems like a paradox.
It does, right. But to Spinoza, that's where true freedom is. It comes from aligning ourselves with the flow of the universe, acting in accordance with our nature and the nature of reality itself.
It's a different kind of freedom than we usually think of, which is more like, I can do whatever I want. Consequences be damned.
Yeah, totally different. For Spinoza, it's about liberation from being ruled by our passions, from the ignorance that makes us cling to fleeting desires and harmful behaviors. It's about seeing clearly, understanding deeply, and making choices that lead to genuine well-being.
That sounds like it takes a lot of self-awareness.
It does. And that's where the real challenge is. Spinoza believed we need to cultivate that capacity for reason if we want to achieve this kind of freedom. We got to examine our motivations, understand our desires, and make choices that are in harmony with our true nature.
He also had some interesting things to say about how we relate to each other. He really stressed understanding and appreciating our shared humanity.
Yeah, he thought we should try to see the world through other people's eyes. Recognize that everyone's acting based on their own understanding, even if it's limited or flawed.
So, like, cultivating empathy and compassion even for people who seem different from us or have different beliefs.
Exactly. Spinoza saw hatred, anger, envy as super destructive, harmful to us and to others. He thought true strength comes from love, understanding, and striving for what's truly good for everyone.
It's kind of striking how relevant that feels today, with so much division and polarization in the world.
You're right. His ethics are like an antidote to all that fear and anger. He reminds us that we're all interconnected, that we share this common humanity, and that we depend on each other for well-being.
It's definitely something we all need to be reminded of sometimes. But switching gears a bit, I'm curious about this quote that really jumped out at me. The human mind cannot be totally destroyed along with the body, but something remains that is eternal.
What was Spinoza getting at there? Yeah, that's a juicy one. It gets at his unique take on eternity. He wasn't into the traditional afterlife idea, but he did think something of the human mind persists even after our bodies are gone.
Almost like even though our individual consciousness fades, we're still somehow connected to that larger, timeless reality he identified with God. It's kind of a comforting thought, actually.
It is, and goes back to his idea that we're all part of this one substance, this grand unified reality that's both the universe and God. Even though individual waves crest and disappear, we're still part of that vast ocean of being.
That's beautiful imagery. So we've talked about Spinoza's ideas about freedom, ethics, and reality itself. But how does all that translate into actual advice for living a good life? What did he actually say we should do?
Great question. For Spinoza, real happiness wasn't about chasing pleasure or getting rich. It came from understanding our place in the big picture, aligning ourselves with that eternal order of the universe, and living according to reason.
So, like, seeking wisdom, clarity, living in harmony with nature, both within ourselves and out in the world.
Exactly. And that's why he put so much emphasis on reason. He saw it as the tool that helps us get to that understanding, break free from those controlling passions, and live a more fulfilling, virtuous life.
I bet that resonates with a lot of people today, those who are looking for a more grounded and meaningful way to approach spirituality.
It totally does.
Yeah.
It's amazing how, even though Spinoza was writing centuries ago, his ideas still offer this compelling framework for understanding ourselves, our place in the world, and how to live a life that's both fulfilling and ethical.
But it's not exactly an easy path, is it? Sounds like living ethically, according to Spinoza, takes constant effort, self-reflection, and being willing to question everything you think you know.
You nailed it. It's not about quick fixes or easy answers. It's a lifelong journey of learning, growing, and striving to live in a way that's true to what we understand as good and right. But Spinoza would say it's a journey worth taking.
And along the way, we might discover a sense of freedom, peace, and connection that we never thought possible.
I think Spinoza would definitely agree with that. But before we get too carried away with the lofty stuff, there's another part of his ethics we got to address. He was pretty critical of how he saw religion being misused, especially by those in power.
Oh, yeah. I do remember reading about his critiques of traditional religious institutions.
He was really concerned with how religion was often used to control people through fear, superstition, and blind obedience, rather than encouraging them to actually understand things and develop their own virtue.
Yeah, I can see how that would have been a huge issue back then, given how much power the church had.
Oh, it was major. Spinoza saw it as twisting the true purpose of spirituality. He believed real spirituality should be about cultivating love, compassion, understanding, and that deeper connection with the divine, however you define it.
So for him, it wasn't about rituals or dogma or blindly living ethically and cultivating that connection with something bigger than yourself.
You got it. And he saw reason as the way to get there. True religion, for him, had to be based on reason, not blind faith or fear.
Which is interesting because even with all his critiques, Spinoza wasn't an atheist. He still believed in God, right? Just not the traditional version.
Exactly. Remember, for Spinoza, God wasn't some separate being who's messing around in our affairs or judging us. He saw God as the very fabric of the universe, the underlying reality that's in everything, including us.
So he saw God everywhere, basically, like in the laws of nature, the beauty of the world, even in the very act of thinking and feeling.
Precisely. And that led him to emphasize living in harmony with nature, understanding and accepting things as they are, rather than trying to force our own will on the world.
It's a perspective that really encourages us to approach life with a sense of awe and wonder, appreciate how everything's connected, and find meaning in just being part of this whole grand unfolding reality.
It is. And while it might challenge how we usually think about religion and spirituality, it offers a really powerful alternative that resonates with a lot of people today who are looking for a more grounded and meaningful way to connect with the universe.
Sounds like Spinoza was pushing for a kind of spirituality that's rooted in reason, ethical living, and a deep appreciation for the interconnectedness of everything. Less dogma, more understanding, wonder, and harmony with the world around us.
You've summed it up beautifully. And in our last segment, we'll get into what it actually looks like to live by Spinoza's philosophy in today's world. Stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our Spinoza deep dive. It's been pretty mind-blowing, exploring his ideas about God, the universe, and how all that connects to our lives.
Yeah, and in this last part, we want to bring it down to earth a bit. We've been dancing around Spinoza's ethics, but let's actually unpack what he envisioned for living a good life. Not just theoretically, but practically.
Because it's easy to talk about aligning ourselves with the universe and seeing God and everything, but what does that actually look like day to day?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
And thankfully, Spinoza gave us more than just lofty ideas. He offered some practical guidance based on that core concept we've been talking about, the power of reason.
Right. He wasn't about blind faith or just taking someone's word for it. He was all about using reason to understand ourselves, the world, and how we can live in a way that leads to, well, a good life.
Exactly. And he was very clear that true happiness, or what he sometimes called blessedness, doesn't come from chasing after like wealth or power or what other people think of us. It's much deeper than that.
So no fancy cars or Instagram followers. Then where does it come from? Am I picturing lots of meditation on a mountaintop, totally detached from the messiness of life?
Huh. That's a funny image. While quiet reflection is definitely helpful, Spinoza wouldn't want us to completely detach from the world. Remember, he saw us all as part of this interconnected substance, this unity that is God. So running away isn't the answer.
Okay, no escaping to a hermitage then. But if happiness isn't about external stuff or running away, how do we achieve it according to Spinoza?
He believed it comes from aligning ourselves with the very nature of reality, which means using our reason to gain a really clear understanding of things, recognizing our place in the big picture and acting in a way that makes sense based on that understanding.
I can see how that could lead to a sense of peace, not always being in conflict with how things are, but it also sounds kind of hard.
It is. It's an ongoing process of reflecting, learning, and refining our understanding. It's like polishing a lens. The more you work at it, the clearer your vision gets.
I love that analogy. And just like polishing a lens, there's no real end point. It's a constant striving for more clarity.
Exactly. It's a lifelong journey of expanding our knowledge, going deeper in our understanding of ourselves and the world, and then making sure our actions reflect that understanding.
Speaking of actions, I'm curious about what Spinoza had to say about how we relate to other people. This whole we're all part of one substance thing has to have some implications for how we treat each other, right?
Oh, absolutely. Spinoza was all about understanding, compassion, what we might call empathy today. He saw those qualities as crucial not just for our own well-being, but for society as a whole.
So not just off meditating on a mountaintop, but actively engaging with the world in a way that helps everyone, including
You
ourselves.
got it. He believed that if we truly see other people, recognize their inherent worth as part of that divine substance, it naturally leads to more compassionate and ethical interactions.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a lot harder to demonize someone when you see them as fundamentally connected to you, like part of the same universal fabric.
Right. And Spinoza was very straightforward about calling out those negative emotions that get in the way of ethical living things like hatred, envy, resentment. He saw them as poisons that ultimately hurt us more than the people they're directed at.
So living ethically is about cultivating those positive emotions like love, understanding, and compassion, while also doing the inner work to deal with those destructive emotions that just cause suffering.
Exactly. It's recognizing that we have the capacity for both, but through reason, we can choose to focus on those qualities that lead to genuine happiness and well-being, both for ourselves and those around us.
It's a powerful message, especially now when it's so easy to get swept up in anger, division, and just looking out for number one.
It is. Spinoza offers a different way, one that values understanding, connection, and a deep respect for everyone.
It takes effort, though, doesn't it? Self-reflection, willingness to challenge our assumptions, but it holds the potential for a much more fulfilling and meaningful life.
That's it. And I think that's the core of Spinoza's ethics. It's not about reaching some perfect state, but about continually striving to live in a way that aligns with what we understand to be true, good, and helpful for everyone to thrive.
Well, I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about today. After diving deep into Spinoza's world, what resonates with you about his vision of a good life? What would it look like to bring a bit of that wisdom into your world?
Those are great questions to ponder. And remember, this journey of understanding and self-discovery, it never really ends. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Baruch Spinoza.